I met Jason Barnes in the most typical way imaginable. At a friend's 4th of July barbecue in suburban Michigan. He was flipping burgers in a tiger's cap and giving off that confident, everyman energy that made you think he knew how to fix your car and file your taxes. I was 24, fresh out of undergrad, working an entry-level position at a nonprofit in downtown Detroit. He was 27 and in sales, the kind of guy who always had something clever to say and a story that made people laugh. We hit it off quickly. He said I had quiet confidence, which felt like such a thoughtful thing to say at the time. I didn't realize it was code for easier to control. We dated for just over a year before the cracks started showing. Jason was charming to everyone else, but when it was just us, he had a way of making me feel like everything I said was dumb or naive or unrealistic. When I mentioned wanting to eventually go back to grad school for social work, he chuckled and said, "Sure, and I want to become an astronaut. You know that costs like, what, $80,000? Who's paying for that?" When I told him I wanted to save up to maybe open a small community resource center someday, he rolled his eyes and said, "You wouldn't last 2 weeks managing something like that. It's not just playing around with ideas, you actually need business sense." The thing is, it wasn't always cruel. It was insidious. Jason wasn't the kind of guy to yell or break things. No, his specialty was slow erosion, chipping away at my confidence with these offhand remarks and jokes, until I wasn't sure if I was being sensitive, or if he really was just trying to help. He'd say things like, "I'm just being honest," or, "You know I support you, but someone's got to keep you grounded." First I believed him. I told myself he was right, that dreaming big was something immature people did, that I should be grateful I had a stable job, even if I hated the low pay and the micromanaging director. I told myself that Jason loved me, and that he wanted what was best for me. After all, he always paid when we went out. He once helped me change a flat tire. He met my parents and they liked him. What more could I ask for? But then things started getting more overt. One night I stayed late at work helping coordinate a food drive. I was exhausted when I got home and he was sitting on my couch, arms crossed, watching some sports docuseries. "Took you long enough," he said, and I laughed, thinking he was kidding. But he wasn't. You do realize none of that actually matters, right? You're busting your ass to organize canned peas. Meanwhile, my company just signed a 6-figure deal. That's what actual value looks like. That night, something cracked a little. I didn't say anything, but I remember sitting in the shower afterward and feeling this deep ache in my chest. Not sadness, not exactly. It was more like shame. Like I was embarrassed to be me. Like maybe I really was less than him. And then he started talking about me being a lot to handle. That phrase came up a lot. I was a lot when I cried after my dog passed. I was a lot when I got anxious about bills. I was a lot when I forgot to grab milk on the way home. He'd say it with a sigh, like he was trying so hard to be patient, like I was this huge emotional drain and he was some saint for putting up with me. And I believed that too for a while. I remember one time, after I had a small meltdown about not being able to afford an emergency dentist visit, he looked at me with this mix of pity and annoyance and said, "I'm not your therapist, Emma. I can't carry all your problems for you." That stung. Because I hadn't asked him to. I never asked him to pay for it. I just wanted comfort. I wanted him to care. But he made it seem like my emotions were an inconvenience. A few weeks later, I told him I was thinking of quitting my job to freelance as a grant writer on my own. I'd been building up a side hustle doing exactly that for nonprofits in smaller towns who couldn't afford full-time staff. I was excited. I thought maybe he'd finally see me as someone ambitious. Instead, he laughed in my face. "You? Run your own business? You can't even keep your apartment clean half the time. Let's be real. You'd last 3 weeks before crawling back to your desk job." I'll never forget that moment. We were sitting at his kitchen island and I just went completely quiet. Not angry, just hollow. I looked at him, and I saw this man who didn't think I was capable of anything. Not just unsupportive but actively rooting for me to fail. Like he needed me to be small so he could feel big. That was the moment something changed in me. Not immediately, not like a movie montage where I packed my bags that night and drove off into the sunset. But something inside me decided I wasn't going to keep shrinking to make him feel better. I smiled, nodded like I agreed with him, and quietly started planning the rest of my life without him in it. And I'll tell you exactly how that went right after this. The next few weeks were a quiet storm in my mind. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not my friends, not even my sister, what I was planning. I had learned to keep things to myself after years of having my dreams trampled by someone who claimed to love me. Instead, I kept my head down, smiled when I was supposed to, and spent every spare second working on my side clients. Grant proposals, budget breakdowns, donor letters. I lived inside Google Docs and spreadsheets. I took Zoom meetings during lunch breaks, responded to emails at 2 a.m., and tracked every dollar that came in. And slowly, something began to shift. These organizations, small food banks in Kentucky, a shelter for veterans in Arizona, a community garden project in Ohio, they were so grateful for the help. They weren't big clients and I wasn't making much at first, but they trusted me. They gave me full control of the language, the timelines, the tone, and I felt competent. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually good at something. I'd walk out of Jason's apartment some mornings, dreading the snide remarks that would inevitably come, and I'd just replay the emails I'd gotten from clients the night before. "We got the funding, thank you so much, Emma. Your edits made the difference. We couldn't have done this without you." It became my armor. Jason, meanwhile, didn't notice the shift. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He kept making comments, kept acting like I was some well-meaning idiot floundering through adulthood. Like when I forgot to Venmo him $11 for sushi and he said, "This is why you'll never be independent. You can't even handle lunch without help." Or when I told him I'd landed a client that paid me $400 for a one-off proposal and he replied, "Let me know when that number has a comma in it." I didn't even bother fighting back anymore. I just smiled. I knew what I was building. He didn't. And that gave me more peace than I could have imagined. Then came the breaking point. It was a Sunday afternoon, late September, and we were supposed to go to a pumpkin patch with a couple of his coworkers and their girlfriends. I had been up until 3 a.m. the night before finishing a grant for a domestic abuse shelter in Spokane that was desperate for emergency funds. I was tired but proud. I'd gotten the submission in with an hour to spare. I was running on caffeine and adrenaline and stupidly thought Jason would care. So I told him about it. I was standing in his kitchen drinking cold coffee and said, "I think I saved this shelter. They were going to have to close a program. But now, if the funding comes through." He didn't even look up from his phone. Just said, "Jesus, Emma, can we go one day without hearing about your little charity gigs?" That was it. That was the final nail. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just shut down. I put my mug in the sink, grabbed my keys, and said I wasn't feeling well. He didn't protest. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just shrugged and said, "Don't bail on the hayride next weekend." I drove straight to my apartment, sat on my bed, and stared at the wall for an hour. Then I opened my laptop and called my cousin Riley. Riley was the opposite of Jason in every conceivable way. Loud, opinionated, fiercely loyal, and absolutely relentless about people she loved reaching their full potential. She had been talking about starting a digital consultancy/commerce hybrid for months, but never had the time to do it alone. We had joked about teaming up before, but I never took it seriously. Until now. "You serious?" she said when I told her I was ready to move. "Like really serious?" I told her yes. I wanted in. I didn't want to waste another year doubting myself. "Pack your crap," she said. "I'll clear out the guest room. We're gonna light this thing up." 2 weeks later, I gave notice at work. 3 weeks after that, I sublet my apartment to a friend's cousin, stuffed everything I owned into the back of my dad's borrowed pickup, and drove from Michigan to Austin, Texas, without telling Jason until the day before I left. I sent him a single text. "I'm moving. This isn't working anymore. Please don't contact me." He replied, "Wait, what?" Then, "Emma, be serious." Then, "You're making a huge mistake." And finally, "You'll be back." I didn't respond. I deleted the thread. And then I turned the volume up on my road trip playlist and didn't look back. The first few months in Austin were brutal. Riley and I lived on top ramen and gas station coffee. We launched the business, Resonant Strategies, out of her second bedroom, working on a folding table with one working printer and spotty Wi-Fi. We took on any client who would pay us, from Etsy shop owners to dog trainers to a guy selling handmade belt buckles who paid us in gift cards. I worked 14-hour days, weekends, holidays. There were nights I cried from sheer exhaustion. But every day I woke up knowing I was building something that was mine. No one was breathing down my neck. No one was calling me a burden. And every small win, a contract signed, a website launched, a glowing review, felt like a middle finger to the man who told me I couldn't do this. By month 4, we had our first 5-figure month. By month 7, we brought on a freelance designer. By month 10, we had repeat clients across 5 states. By the 1-year mark, we were officially registered as an LLC, and I had a salary. Not a huge one, but one I earned with my damn hands. And then in month 12, just as Riley and I were celebrating with cheap champagne on the balcony, I got the email that changed everything. An email from a name I hadn't seen in exactly 366 days. Jason Barnes. Subject: Opportunity. I remember staring at the subject line for a solid 30 seconds, thinking it had to be spam or some kind of phishing attempt. The last time I had seen Jason Barnes' name was the day I blocked his number after he told me I'd be back. Like I was a puppy who wandered off the porch. But there it was, clear as day, with a little Gmail avatar next to his name. Him in that stupid Red Wings hoodie, smirking at the camera like he owned the world. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. My stomach dropped in that sick, familiar way, like a ghost had walked into the room. Riley came out of the kitchen holding 2 champagne flutes and immediately clocked my face. What happened? You look like you saw a corpse. I turned my laptop to show her. She squinted at the screen and snorted. Tell me that man is not seriously emailing you like he's applying for a job at Costco. I haven't opened it yet, I said. My voice sounded weird even to me, tight, robotic. Riley sat down beside me and said, "Want me to read it first?" I shook my head. I clicked. The email wasn't long. 5 sentences, maybe 6. It started with a half-hearted "Hope you've been doing well." That already made me roll my eyes. Then, "I've been hearing great things about your business. Sounds like you're doing some impressive work." No mention of how he'd heard anything. Probably my Instagram. I hadn't blocked him there, just made my account private, and he must have followed one of my friends who didn't know the whole story. The next part made my jaw clench. "I've been looking to pivot into more entrepreneurial opportunities, and thought you might be in the market for someone with strong sales and account management experience. I've attached my resume in case you're hiring or know someone who is." I didn't even notice Riley had grabbed my glass until she said, "Girl, you're crushing the stem." I looked down and sure enough, I was squeezing the champagne flute so hard it looked ready to snap. I set it down and kept reading. The email ended with, "We always made a good team. Let me know if you'd be open to catching up." That's when I closed the laptop and leaned back like I'd just been hit in the chest with a bowling ball. "The audacity," Riley said, shaking her head. "This man burned you alive and is now knocking on your door with his hat in his hands like nothing ever happened?" I didn't say anything for a long time. Not because I was sad or even angry exactly, but because I was genuinely stunned. Jason Barnes, the same man who mocked every idea I ever had, who told me I was nothing without him, who laughed in my face when I said I wanted to work for myself, was now asking me for a job. Like this was some kind of redemption arc. Like this was a movie. I opened the resume. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Spite. A desire to see what a man with so much fake confidence actually put on paper. It was as smug as I expected. Buzzwords like synergy and growth mindset. A whole paragraph about his dynamic client relationship strategies. And under accomplishments, one line that said, consistently top 10% in regional sales volume. No context. No numbers. Just vibes. He listed collaboration as a strength. I almost laughed out loud. Riley did laugh, actually loud enough to make the dog bark. "This is your villain origin story," she said. "He's literally handing you the match." But I didn't reply. I didn't send a snarky message. I didn't even delete the email. I just archived it. Not because I was trying to be mature, but because it wasn't worth the energy. He didn't deserve a response. Not a single second more of my time. Later that night, I lay awake thinking about how much had changed in a year. How I had gone from second-guessing whether I was capable of even surviving on my own to turning down work from clients because I was too busy. How I had once let a man's opinion of me dictate the size of my ambition. And now? Now he was in my inbox, dressed up in professional language, hoping I'd throw him a lifeline. I thought about what he'd said to me that night in his kitchen. "You wouldn't last 2 weeks." That line had lived in my head for months, taunting me every time things got hard. But the funny thing is, it turned into fuel. Every time we hit a rough patch, when a client ghosted or a marketing strategy flopped, or Riley and I fought over cash flow, I'd hear his voice in my head, and it would push me forward. "Watch me last another week, Jason. Watch me prove you wrong." And now, a full year later, I had built something he couldn't ignore. He could pretend it was just about business, but I knew better. I could see it in the wording, the flattery, the resume. This wasn't about a job. This was about him realizing I'd done the one thing he thought I couldn't. I made it without him. I moved on. I got stronger. And I didn't look back. The next morning I opened my laptop again, went into the archives, and looked at the email one more time. Then I blocked the address. I didn't tell Riley. I didn't post a vague tweet. I just moved on with my day, checked the calendar, hopped on a client call and got back to work. Because the best revenge wasn't saying no. It was not needing to say anything at all. After I blocked his email, I figured that was it. Done. Sealed. Dust off your hands and move on. But the thing about silence is that it echoes, especially when it's earned. I didn't go around telling people about the email. Not because I was trying to protect Jason, but because I was genuinely done letting him take up space in my head. Riley asked once, maybe twice, if I'd heard anything else. I told her no. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That's what I loved about her. She knew when to push and when to drop it. So I dropped it too. Focused on the business. On building a life that wasn't shaped around proving anything to anyone. Resonant Strategies was growing faster than either of us had planned. We'd signed 2 retainer clients, one, a sustainable apparel brand out of Portland run by 3 sisters, and another, a mental health platform in Chicago trying to expand outreach into underrepresented communities. They weren't huge names, but they believed in us, gave us freedom, and actually listened to what we had to say. That alone felt revolutionary. It was wild how different the world felt when I wasn't constantly bracing for the next cutting remark or passive-aggressive jab. I could breathe. I could think clearly. I could be myself. I even started doing things I used to love again. Reading thrillers, going to antique markets, baking banana bread that always came out lopsided but smelled amazing. I signed up for a local women in tech networking group, even though I didn't consider myself tech, and ended up finding 3 new clients and 2 new friends who introduced me to the most absurdly addicting trivia night at a bar with sticky tables and the best onion rings in Texas. My life was expanding in ways I hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Jason stayed a memory. A closed book on a shelf I no longer cared to open. Every now and then I'd get a friend request from someone in his orbit. An old coworker, a guy I'd met once at a wedding, someone whose name rang a vague bell but who I hadn't spoken to in years. I just hit ignore. Block if I was in the mood. I wasn't scared of him. Not anymore. I just didn't want his world anywhere near mine. Then one night, about 6 weeks after the email, I got a DM on LinkedIn. From someone named Allison Grady. The name sounded familiar, and when I clicked her profile it clicked. She was one of Jason's former coworkers. I'd met her at a holiday party 2 years ago. She was nice enough. Worked in project management, had a dry sense of humor, and seemed too sharp to be working for the company Jason bragged about like it was Google. The message was short. Hey Emma. Not sure if this is weird, but I heard Jason reached out to you. He mentioned possibly working with you again. Just wanted to say I always thought you were smart as hell and way too good for him. Hope you're thriving. I blinked at the screen, then reread it, then laughed. Out loud. Alone in my apartment at 11 p.m. Because here it was proof. Not just that Jason had talked about me, likely bragged about reaching out, probably spun it like he was being generous or taking pity, but that even the people closest to him had seen through his act. I didn't reply to Allison. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because it felt like peeking into the past, and I had no desire to go digging around in that sandbox anymore. I screenshotted it though. Just for me. Just for the file in my brain labeled, "Oh, how the tables have turned." The thing that stuck with me most was her wording. Possibly working with you again. As if Jason had framed it like some mutual decision, some collaborative vibe where we were just 2 old pals reconnecting for a professional opportunity. It made me want to hurl. But it also made me realize something even more important. He wasn't looking for work. He was looking for redemption. For validation. For proof that he hadn't been wrong to dismiss me, belittle me, condescend to me. If I had replied even just to say no thanks, he'd have taken it as a win. Proof that I still cared. Proof that I still thought about him. That's why the silence mattered. It wasn't passive-aggressive. It wasn't petty. It was clarity. And I didn't regret it for a second. The next few months flew by. Riley and I hired a part-time assistant named Frankie, who was 17 levels of Type A, and completely revolutionized our client systems. We upgraded to a co-working space downtown that had cold brew on tap and floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel like you were doing something important, even if all you were doing was fixing a typo in a PowerPoint deck. We hit 6 figures in revenue in month 14. We launched a newsletter. We got featured in a local entrepreneur blog. And through it all, I kept waiting for some lingering ache, some echo of Jason, some weird guilt for not giving him closure. But it never came. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel unfinished. I just felt fine. Better than fine. Whole. It's funny, when I was with him, I used to second-guess every decision I made. Every outfit, every meal, every social post, every joke. I'd replay conversations in my head like I was studying for a test. Now, I went days without a single anxious spiral. Weeks without doubting my worth. I knew who I was. I knew what I'd built. And I knew I'd never be that version of myself again. The one who shrank herself to keep someone else comfortable. The real kicker came on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after that email. I was scrolling through TikTok on my lunch break and saw a clip from a podcast called Fail Forward. Some tech bro in a Patagonia vest was interviewing small business owners about resilience. One of the guests? Jason Barnes. I damn near choked on my salad. He looked different, less cocky, more tired. Beard a little too long, button-up slightly wrinkled like he was trying to seem laid back but mostly looked like he was still getting used to being knocked off his pedestal. I listened out of sheer curiosity, fully expecting to hate every second. But what he said stunned me. There was this woman I dated, he said, not using my name but describing our relationship so clearly I knew it had to be me. She had this vision for starting her own thing and I didn't support her. I didn't think she could do it. I was wrong. He paused, then added, she ended up starting a business that's like doing really well now. I actually reached out once, tried to see if I could maybe help. And she never responded. Which, I get. I think that was her way of telling me everything I needed to hear. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Not with regret. With pride. That was my answer. Not in words. Not in emails. In action. In building something without him. In thriving beyond the limits he tried to place on me. In becoming the kind of woman who doesn't need to say, I told you so, because the results speak for themselves. I turned off the video, took another bite of salad and went back to work. There was nothing left to prove. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when the worst thing you feared happens, and you survive it. I used to think that if someone like Jason ever saw me as weak or incapable, it would mean I had failed. That I wasn't good enough. That I'd never recover from that kind of judgment, especially when it came from someone who once claimed to love me. But now, looking back from where I stood in year 2 of running Resonant Strategies, it was almost laughable how much weight I had given to one man's opinion. Not just any man either, but a man whose idea of emotional maturity was saying just being honest before delivering insults with a smug grin. A man who believed empathy was optional, and listening was a chore. And for years, I had convinced myself that his criticisms were reality checks instead of red flags. It had taken me nearly losing myself entirely to figure out that the reason his words cut so deep wasn't because they were true. It was because they were calculated. Designed to land like truth but hollow if you looked close enough. That realization didn't happen all at once. It came in waves. In the quiet confidence I felt closing a deal on my own. In the way I now walked into rooms without rehearsing every sentence in my head. In the freedom of decorating my apartment the way I liked, bright colors, cluttered bookshelves. A gallery wall of prints from small artists that would have made Jason roll his eyes. It was in the way I no longer apologized for having opinions. Or taking up space. Or saying no. I no longer felt the need to defend my choices to anyone. Least of all someone who'd built his identity around being the smartest guy in every room. And as for Jason, after that podcast clip, I never heard another word from him. Maybe he got the message. Maybe he finally realized that apologies only matter when they're attached to accountability. Not opportunism. Or maybe, just maybe, he faded into the rearview mirror like so many other things that no longer had power over me. Around this time, Riley and I decided to do something bold. We opened a small satellite office. Not big, just a cozy 3-room space in a mixed-use building near East Austin. Exposed brick, bad parking, great coffee shop downstairs. It wasn't necessary. We still did most of our work online. But it felt like a declaration. A physical manifestation of everything we had built. We hired our first full-time employee, Clara. A whip-smart digital strategist with pink hair and zero tolerance for mansplaining. She fit right in. We held monthly planning meetings with whiteboards and post-its and too much takeout. We sponsored a local nonprofit gala. We even made custom tote bags because why not? And through all of this, I never once felt tempted to reach out to Jason. Not to gloat. Not to offer closure. Not to ask why he did the things he did. I didn't need to know. I had the answers I needed. Not from him, but from who I had become without him. The version of me that used to walk on eggshells was gone. The version who used to reread texts 20 times before sending them. wondering if I sounded too emotional or too needy or too much, had disappeared. In her place stood someone who didn't just survive, that girl built. She created jobs. She made her rent on time. She pitched clients, fired clients, defended her boundaries, and took naps without guilt. She didn't shrink. She didn't apologize for being human. She didn't carry someone else's emotional baggage on her shoulders like it was her penance. And most of all, she didn't wait for permission anymore. That shift bled into other parts of my life too. My friendships deepened. I found myself choosing better people. Friends who didn't make fun of my ambitions, who celebrated my wins even when they were struggling, who asked how I was really doing and actually listened to the answer. I started dating again, slowly and without pressure. The first guy I went out with was sweet, but spent the entire dinner talking about his fantasy football league. The second one lied about being divorced. The third was interesting. His name was Caleb, and we met at a panel I was speaking on for small business owners. He asked a smart question about funding sources, then caught me afterward to ask if I wanted to grab coffee and talk shop. I almost said no. I was still wary of charm. But he was different. Quiet confidence, not arrogance. He didn't flinch when I talked about past mistakes. He told me about his own without ego. He listened. Like really listened. And when I told him I ran a business, he didn't ask how big it was or how much money we made. He asked what I loved about it. I told him the truth. That I loved building something that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. That I loved watching people realize they could trust me. That I loved waking up every day knowing my time was mine. He smiled and said, "That's badass." It was the first time I'd felt seen by a man in years. We kept it casual. Both of us had full schedules and complicated histories, but he became someone I could count on. No games. No power plays. Just kindness, mutual respect, and the kind of humor that gets funnier the more comfortable you are. One night, months later, we were sitting on my couch watching some terrible reality dating show, and he asked, "Do you ever talk to your ex?" I shook my head. Not since he emailed me his resume. Caleb choked on his water. Wait, what? I told him the story. All of it. From the gaslighting to the move to the email to the podcast. I expected him to maybe get defensive or judgmental, but instead he just said, "Sounds like the trash took itself out." I laughed harder than I had in a long time. And in that moment I knew something that I'd known for a while but hadn't said out loud. I was free. Not just from Jason, but from the version of myself who thought love meant tolerating disrespect. Who thought safety meant settling. Who thought ambition had to be sanded down to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was running a business I loved, surrounded by people who rooted for me, building a future on my own terms. And Jason, he was a blip. A footnote. A warning sign I had learned to read before the next exit. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted peace. And peace doesn't come from holding on to the past. It comes from building something better. And knowing you did it without anyone's permission but your own. It's strange how sometimes the most satisfying part of a story isn't the confrontation, or the apology, or even the revenge. It's the silence. The absence. The moment you realize you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Least of all the person who once tried to write your ending for you. That's how I felt standing outside the venue of our first client appreciation event. Watching people filter and wearing name tags and real smiles, eating sliders and sipping wine, shaking hands and telling each other how much our team had helped them grow. It had been 18 months since I left Michigan. 18 months since I said goodbye to the version of me who believed love meant shrinking, who thought stability was more important than joy, who measured her worth and how well she could avoid upsetting a man who didn't respect her. And now here I was, in heels that didn't hurt, a miracle. Wearing a navy jumpsuit I'd bought on a whim without overthinking it, holding a clipboard and a glass of champagne, watching something I'd helped build bloom into a community. Riley came up beside me, chewing a mini empanada. "Okay, I know I said the budget was tight, but these were worth every damn penny." I grinned. "Told you." She scanned the room and bumped her shoulder into mine. "You good?" I nodded. Better than good. And I meant it. It was the kind of full-body okayness I hadn't known I could feel. Not a high, not a rush, not a temporary thrill. Just grounded. Solid. Like my feet were finally planted in my own life. We made our rounds, chatted with clients and contractors and friends who'd supported us from day one. Clara gave a little speech that somehow made half the room laugh and the other half tear up. At one point I caught myself looking around and thinking, this is real. I made it real. Not despite everything but because of it. Because I left. Because I said no. Because I didn't reply. And that silence, that refusal to give Jason the satisfaction of acknowledgement, became one of the most powerful choices I'd ever made. It was my boundary in action. My final word without saying a single one. He never emailed again. Never made another appearance on a podcast, at least not one that found its way to me. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he stayed stuck. Either way, I didn't care. His story was no longer mine to track. Mine had taken off in its own direction, and I wasn't going to slow down just to peek over my shoulder. I'd made peace with the fact that I would never get an apology that felt like enough. Never hear him say the words I used to beg for in my head. I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. You were never a burden. But the thing is, I no longer needed to hear them. Because the life I had now, this loud, bright, beautiful life, was a better apology than he could ever offer. Said everything he never did. Said I was capable. Said I was worthy. Said I was not too much and never not enough. It said I had value that didn't require translation or negotiation or shrinking. It said I was right to believe in myself even when no one else did. And maybe most importantly, it said that walking away wasn't failure, it was freedom. I used to imagine what I'd say to him if I ever saw him again. In the shower while driving, lying awake at night. I'd script the perfect monologue. Cool, composed, devastating. Something that would make his face crumble. Something that would haunt him. But now, if I saw him on the street, I'd probably just keep walking. Not out of anger, but because there would be nothing left to say. I had built the closure with my own 2 hands. Brick by brick. Day by day. Client by client. I had become the woman I used to hope I'd be. The kind who doesn't chase validation. The kind who doesn't entertain what no longer serves her. The kind who lets people miss her in silence. Later that night, after the party, I sat on my balcony with a slice of leftover cake and a half-finished to-do list. The air smelled like barbecue from the restaurant down the street, and someone's dog barked 3 floors below. Caleb was out of town for a conference, but he'd texted me a photo of a diner milkshake and said, "Not as good as yours." I smiled at my screen and set it down. I didn't need a man to make me feel whole, but I'd learned that the right kind of love doesn't ask you to earn it. Just is. Supports. It celebrates. It doesn't feel like walking a tightrope in the wind. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who whispered dreams instead of saying them out loud. The one who edited herself until there was almost nothing left. I wished I could go back and tell her, "You won't always feel this small. One day your voice will be the loudest in the room. One day you'll stop apologizing for existing." But maybe she wouldn't have believed me. Maybe she had to become me to finally understand. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and looked up at the stars peeking through the city sky. No soundtrack. No applause. Just me alone and full. Not chasing. Not hurting. Not replying. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the next chapter to save me. I was the next chapter. I finished the cake, turned off the porch light, and went to bed. And that was the end of it. Not with a bang. Not with revenge. But with a woman who left, who built, who healed, and who never looked back.